Good afternoon, everybody. This is Funding Your Community Ministry Part 2. So last week when we met, we talked about building a case for your ministry and about soliciting individual donors. Today we're going to talk mostly about grant writing, how to find grant funding opportunities, and I gotta get this on slideshow. And then a little bit about special events, so I'm just going to touch on that a little bit. So there's a giant picture of me. And, you know, if you've been on these webinars, you've seen this many times, but this is the latest book I've written, 7 Creative Models for Community Ministry, so if you're interested in purchasing that, there's the link. And it's really for churches that have decided that reaching out into the community is important to them. So here are some options for you and a process to follow to really move your ideas forward. And then I have 2 other books that aren't Judson books. These are Alban Institute books that are now available at Roman and Littlefield, so Starting a Nonprofit at Your Church. It's for congregations that would like to start a separate 501c3, and churches usually do this for community development purposes. And then the second book is Winning Grants to Strengthen Your Ministry, which is really step-by-step how to put together a grant proposal for a foundation or a corporate funding entity if you're interested in seeking that kind of funding. And then I do consulting, so you know, if you're interested in talking to me, I usually write grant templates or I do coaching. So if you're not in the Twin Cities metro area, I'd probably do some phone coaching with you on how to identify funders, how to write a killer grant proposal, really how to develop that case and pitch what it is that you're doing so that it would be appealing to both individual donors and foundations and corporations. You can email me at the Yahoo address that's on the very first slide if you're interested in that, and I will respond. So let's review what I talked about last week just quickly. I emphasize the importance of pursuing a broad funding base that might include many different kinds of support. So that could include grants, special events, earned income, so fees that you'd get from providing a good or a service, and support from individual donors. There are a number of other kinds of support too. And what you're looking for would be many different size gifts. So we all want one big gift from one donor that will make the pain of fundraising go away, but really it's better to have a variety of size gifts and a variety of sources. The importance of cultivating individual donors. I would say a lot of people focus maybe a little too much on the grants side of things and don't work on individual donors, and it is a process, so we talked about that last week. And then the importance of making the case for your work and your organization. And that's what's included in your grant proposal in a more fleshed out way. So maybe even trying to write up your case based on your results, what you're doing, the need, and your partners, maybe in 1 to 2 pages, and then that can be expanded into a grant proposal. I'm just going to talk very briefly about special events. I've worked on a number of special events, big, medium-sized, and very large. Done several golf tournaments, banquets. One group I worked with used to sell pumpkins at Halloween. We did a golf fundraiser, so I was out on the golf course on Saturday morning with my husband selling these. I can't remember all the details of it. So anyway, if you've worked on special events, you can relate to that. I think there are some real upsides to them. So what I'm talking about would be an actual fundraising event, which I distinguish from a cultivation event. So fundraising events are designed to raise money. They might also have sort of secondary benefits of raising the visibility of your organization, or you get to meet some of these people, but really the ultimate goal of them is to raise money. Cultivation events would probably be free. You'd invite individual donors or prospective donors to something like that, and just to get to know them a little bit better and maybe take an offering at the end. So I would distinguish that from a fundraising event. I think fundraising events could be, you know, a lot of groups would have banquets. Golf tournaments are really common. I've seen groups bring in musical talent or have a theater performance and raise money that way. One time, one group I worked with had somebody a famous actress come in with her one-woman show about Zelda Fitzgerald, and they did it as a benefit for our organization, which was there to support writers. It was an arts organization, so that was a really good fit. So I think the upside of doing fundraising events, they can really enhance visibility for your organization. I think they do, or they can present an opportunity to tell new people about the organization. I think that would be part of the main reason to do them. So if you're doing a fundraising event and it's just the same old people showing up all the time, you might be able to get them to give without putting on an event. So really part of the main goal here is to get new people to show up. And you might be able to raise a significant amount of money depending on what you do. And I've seen some really simple events raise money. There's a local bilingual early childhood center that does this really fabulous art and wine event, and it's in somebody's big mansion every year. And costs are low for that, and they're able to raise kind of a lot of money because it's fancy, and they've got people that can really sell those tickets. So I think a couple of downsides of special events can be that they can consume vast amounts of time. They're probably one of the most time-consuming fundraising activities you could pursue, depending on what it is that you do. And it could require a lot of staff time, for example. So I think when you're going to pursue something like this, you ought to look at how much time your staff is realistically going to need to put in. Because people often talk about that like, well, it didn't cost us anything. And I said, well, how many hours did your executive director or development director put in? Oh, she put in 20 hours a week for about 15 weeks out of the year. That's a ton of time, and it's an opportunity cost. So could that person have been putting their time elsewhere and raised even more money? And if you don't have volunteers who can sell your tickets, your tables, your foursomes, whatever it is, your event may not be a success. So I've just got a few rules of thumb with special events, and you can ask me some questions at the end if you've got a particular event in mind. So I think it's important when you're doing events, especially starting out, to keep the fixed costs low. So if you're just starting and you're talking to a nationally known speaker who's going to charge $25,000 to come in and speak, I don't know if that's a good place to start. So that's what I'm talking about with fixed costs. It costs you the same amount of money regardless of how many people show up to your event. So the other strategy I would recommend is to get sponsors to cover your costs. So if you're going to do a banquet, you're going to have food costs. Maybe it costs money to rent the venue. If you're doing a golf tournament, it's going to cost money to be on the golf course per person. So look for businesses. It's often businesses that want to get their name out in front of the public. Probably at the event, so you might recognize a sponsor by having banners up at the event. You might include their logo or information about them in any written material that you put together about the event. Put it up on your website, for example. So try to find some sponsors like that, and it could be that your board of directors, maybe some of your major donors would be able to lead you to people like that, because that way you can tell everyone who's attending the event that most of their money, or even all of the money that they gave, is going towards your charitable purpose. I think another essential is to, let me go backwards, build a really strong sales force. And by that I mean you've got to have volunteers who are willing to sell, like I said. So without this, I probably wouldn't go forward with a fundraising event, because you've got to have people who are willing to say, yes, I'm going to get 4 of my friends to buy tables, and I'm going to start working on it today. Because usually you won't draw enough people to an event by just sending out information in the mail or putting flyers around or putting ads in the newspaper. It's got to be like a person-to-person invite to be really successful. And I would say another best practice is to involve volunteers in managing the event. So it's not to say that staff wouldn't have a hand in it at all, but wow, you can really spend a lot of time on fundraising events. And so I would, if you can find volunteers who are willing to help you line up the food or the venue, or recruit other volunteers who are going to help with setup and tear down. Could work with, if you're bringing in talent, you know, a singer or a speaker or something, work with that person's agent to kind of nail down travel stuff. There's all these details that go into an event, so I would recommend to recruit some volunteers to help with that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how to track down grant funders. So like I said, last week we talked about building the case, kind of overall what funders look for, and the individual donors. Today we're talking about special events and more specifically about grants. So it's important as you're thinking about grant funders to realize that not all funders are going to be a good fit for your group. So I think it's important to avoid funding relationships that will force you to abandon your values, for example. So if you're really strongly faith-based, I would recommend that you look for funders that at least are accepting of that, if not ones that are excited about it. You don't want to be pushed into programs that aren't a good fit with your mission or that you can't deliver on. So it's really tempting to chase the money. So you're working on you know, youth development and family services, and all of a sudden there's money for housing, and you've never really thought about getting into housing, but the money's pretty tempting. I would avoid also ones that require too much reporting or other investments of time. And then, like I said, respect your faith if your group is faith-based. So the goal is to get to a short list. So it's not to create as long a list of funders as possible, but rather to continue to cull your list until a short list of strong prospects remains. So you'll get the list will get shorter as you begin to research prospects further, so you can examine funder websites. You're going to talk to nonprofit colleagues about the funder. You're going to talk to the funder themselves, kind of how this goes. And then I'm going to talk to you about different types of grant funders. So one is a private foundation. So these are often family enterprises, and they're not connected to a business or corporate entity. So family foundations are often focused on the interests of particular family members. When you look at the list of their board of directors, you might see a lot of people with similar names. And the group is probably intergenerational. So that's been a shift as money is being transferred over to a younger generation of people. There's been a lot of information in the news about that these last few years. Many of these foundations are led by young adults, so foundation interests are shifting more to what young adults, like under the age of 40, are interested in. Seeing more like community change organizations being funded, a lot of interest in the environment and sustainability. Advocacy organizations, so that's what I'm seeing as young adults are taking over. And some private foundations are humongous, others are very small. So the ones that are very small make just a few grants a year, so they might not accept unsolicited proposals, but like the Ford Foundation is a private foundation here in Minnesota. The McKnight Foundation, which is our largest private foundation in the state, is a private foundation. And then there are corporations. So corporations usually give to things that are related to their products and things that are tied to the geographical area where they're located. So the example that I can think of here in the Twin Cities, I've submitted many requests to the General Mills Foundation. As you know, they're a giant food corporation. They make tons of cereal every year, snack foods, popcorn, Yoplait yogurt. So they have a big focus on nutrition and health and wellness. In particular, they want kids to get out there and exercise. So there's like a fitness and you know, work on eating healthy kind of a focus. I would say, you know, most corporations would give the largest amount of money in their headquarters area, but also would give in the area where they've got plants or operations. So it would be important for you to figure out or become aware of the companies that have operations in your area, and particularly if it's a headquarters. I think that they're more conservative than some other funders, so they're more wary of hot button issues. Depending on the part of the country that you're located in, I find corporations may not be as excited about giving to faith-based organizations. And they may have more questions about what that means that you're faith-based. And then I think they've got more respect for diversity, and then there's this concern for their customer base. So, you know, when I wrote the Winning Grants book, the person at the General Mills Foundation that I interviewed said, you know, look, we have this incredibly diverse group of constituents. We've got senior executives, board members, you know, tons of vendors, employees, and customers. And imagine all the diversity that exists within that huge group of people. So we really can't align ourselves with faith-based organizations that are sectarian, are going to be putting forth a particular faith view. So there are a couple ways that corporations give. One is through a corporate giving program, and then the second is through, another one is through the corporate foundations, and some will give to events too, or some marketing dollars. So corporate giving programs, with those, the grants are often distributed through the Community Relations Department, and giving is based on the profit made by the company in the previous year. And usually you'll see that decisions are made by a committee of employees. They might be senior executives. They might be, you know, people from many different departments and many different levels within the organization. Corporate foundations, you know, and you need to know that some companies have both. They have both a corporate giving program and they have a corporate foundation. Target is an example of a corporation like that. They've got a foundation and corporate giving through their stores. So this is a legally incorporated giving entity, and you know, corporate foundations often have dedicated staffs. There'd be people that you could call to ask questions. So often they're called program officers. They may have a more formal application process, and there might be some more information available on what they're all about than with a corporate giving program. And the third way that companies give, wow, this looks like Versailles or something, would be corporate sponsorship. So often you've got to have an in at the company or even have a senior executive involved to secure one of these, but usually those are for major public events. So it'd be art gallery exhibitions, a community health fair or something like that. And the corporation receives some publicity and recognition for its support. Often in an economic downturn, these are the first kind of dollars to be cut, would be the corporate sponsorships. So just know that there are a couple of buckets that you might be able to identify even with one company. They might give in several different ways, and it would be good to figure out where you fit the best. The other thing I'll say about corporations is that they really, really want their employees involved before they'll give. So with some, it'll say it right in their giving guidelines. So most corporations or foundations that have giving programs will have on their website a list of criteria or a description of what they're looking for, and that's called their giving guidelines. So look at that. And some will even say, just say it straight out, that we aren't going to fund anything where if there's not an employee involved. So that'd be good for you to know. Community foundations are a little bit different in that they both raise and distribute funds. They're often focused on a particular geographic area or demographic group. So the Chicago Community Trust is an example of a community foundation. The Women's Foundation here in the Twin Cities is another example. Often they'll be conducting research as well. And before you approach a community foundation, it's important to know that a lot of their money is tied up in what's called donor-advised funds. So it's individuals or families in your area that will set up a fund through which they can distribute their philanthropic giving. And they pay a fee to the community foundation to take care of that for them, to manage it for them. So you can see a long list of funds, and there's a boatload of money invested. at the Community Foundation, but most of it's probably not available for general grant distribution. I find with community foundations is that they may be more open to giving to communities of color or to grassroots organizations. And they're often more interested in funding capacity building, meaning if you needed money to hire a strategic planning consultant or to hire an evaluation consultant to work with you or to do some board training or something like that, your community foundation in your area might fund that for you. And there are always government grants. I'm not going to talk much about them today, but I would say, you know, for smaller or for newer organizations, they might not be a fit. Proposals are usually pretty lengthy, you know, and they're going to require a higher level of reporting. I would say if you think there's a fit there, and I would say if you're going to build affordable housing, probably thinking about government grants might be a good option for you. It'd be important for you to stay connected with your local, state, and federal officials. And I think you'll need to hire somebody to do this for you probably, because there's a certain way of applying that will help ensure that you can give you a better chance of securing money. So as you're getting ready to do your search, I would say it'd be good to identify some keywords that describe your work. So write down as many words as you can think of that best describe the program you are seeking funding for. So an example would be, you know, programs for the homeless. Could be connected to websites or entries that include the word homeless, housing, poverty, hunger, employment, mental health, and addiction recovery or treatment. So sometimes when I work with people, they say, well, we're going to be doing a housing program and we looked at their housing in the grants database and we didn't find anything. And I say, well, did you know, you're talking about working with young people and you're going to provide employment training. Did you look under those words? So think pretty expansively before you do your search. Another tip would be to research where other organizations get their support, so looking at their annual reports and newsletters. So many nonprofits publish an annual report, and typically it's now online with they'll list everybody, including institutions that gave them money last year, sometimes with the amounts listed. So I would identify some groups with a similar mission to yours or similar programming and review their annual reports. And if you're seeing the same funder appear over and over again, then I think you've got one that you need to investigate. So here's an example of what an annual report looks like. And I just watch the news. You know, watch your Facebook posts if you like some of the news organizations. Look at giving patterns of local foundations, major projects being undertaken by local nonprofits, so there might be news on those. Local businesses or corporations that are doing particularly well or not well. So if you see companies are merging, or if there's one that's acquiring a lot of other companies, I would track with them just to see what their philanthropic giving is like. Or research your information that could bolster the case for your program. So we talked about being able to document your need and making a case for that. So there might be statistics or studies that would help bolster your case. There is a completely online news service here in Minnesota, or a couple of them, and they do a better job of covering nonprofits and philanthropic organizations, I would say. So keep your eyes peeled for the news outlets that would have more articles on topics related to this. Something that people often forget is that your volunteers may well be connected to funding organizations that could provide funding. So make sure you talk to your board members, your program volunteers, and your church members about where they work. Or if you're trying to make inroads with a particular private foundation, you might just ask around and maybe you'll find somebody who knows someone who's on the board. And like I said, with corporate giving programs, corporate foundations, you'll really need somebody to advocate on your behalf. And then know your church members. So your church members may have all kind of connections, like I just said. So sometimes, you know, in my church jobs, I've just gotten up in the pulpit to make a short announcement and said, we're really looking for support from these 5 institutions. And I used to put a flyer in the bulletin. People could write their name on it and put it in the offering plate, and then I'd see it later. Now we do it differently. They could text me or something. But ask people to get in touch with you if they've got some connections. And then to really network with other nonprofits or churches. Sometimes information about funding opportunities comes up in the conversation. So I'll talk to you quickly about databases. So I would say probably mostly what you're looking for would be some like a local or statewide database. So if you're doing your work in a particular neighborhood or a town or a community, it's going to be local funders that you're looking at. If you're looking at doing something statewide or regionally or replicating across a number of states or something, you might be looking at national funders. So probably local would be a good idea for you. I'll tell you how to track down finding your local organization that might have a database that you could buy into. The national one that I like is Foundation Center, and it's Foundation Grants Online. So this is just a picture of their web page. So look them up. You can buy into it for differing periods of time. They'll give you a 24-hour trial if you just want to check it out and use it, and you can buy it with more bells and whistles or fewer bells and whistles. So I would recommend taking a look at that if you think you want to seek some national funding. And then to find your local association of grant makers. So foundations and corporations that have philanthropic programs usually are in a group together. It's like a trade organization. Might be a metro area in your state, or it might be statewide or even a region that is pulled together. But if you look on the forum of regional associations of grant makers, it's givingforum.org, and look for your regional association is where you'd look. You'll find a list. You'll find a list by state and metro area, and then go on that website, and you'll be looking for the database that they're selling or putting together that would be more local. You'll also look for the Common Grant application, which I will talk about in a minute. And then to use a grants database, just know, so what are you searching for once you get in there? So we realize that most funders focus their grants on a few specific issues. So program grants are more the norm now. It's easier and better for you to get general operating grants that are not restricted. But unfortunately, most grant funders are going to give you money for program expenses. So examples of the kinds of things that funders might focus on would be increasing access to early childhood education, promoting economic development in urban neighborhoods, reducing health disparities, and creating more affordable housing. You might also be able to do kind of a backward search, so search for groups like yours that receive grants for their work, so similar in mission, similar in types of programs offered, similar in budget size. So I say budget size because if you, if you're a smaller church and you want to start an after-school program, and you're in a city with a Boys and Girls Club that has 10 units or 10 clubs all around the city and a multi-million-dollar budget, there's probably not much of a match up there in terms of the might not be a match in terms of the kinds of funders that would support the two different organizations. So look for one that's similar in size. Know the population that you're going to be serving. So we talked some about this last week, to be able to identify in really specific terms, are you going to serve young adults? Is this for children in poverty? Is it for unemployed women or homeless men, for example? And then search by key text. So maybe it's the type of program or approach, for example. Maybe you're going to look for a particular neighborhood. So if you're working in the central neighborhood of your city, you want to search for funders that would provide support there. And then search by type of grant. So, and these are the types of grants. I haven't even talked about this yet. So general operating would be unrestricted money that you can spend however you see fit. So general operating grants are becoming more rare. But they're the best kind of money for you to get because then you can spend it however you need to spend it. Program grants would be just that, directed towards expenses of a particular program. So say you were an organization that had, summer programming for youth or on camp scholarships, that would be one kind of program. Maybe you run a high school graduation program for the older kids, like 9th through 12th grade, so that would be another program. Maybe you've got a middle school program that focuses on field trips and cooking, so that would be another program. So you might have some general grant text that describes your organization. So we'll talk about writing a grant in a minute. But then have a number of different longer program descriptions depending on which funder you're going to apply to. So you might have all these different permutations. Oh, and then I was going to say capital grants. I was waving my arms around even though I'm on a webinar, so I bumped the computer. Capital grants would be typically for bricks and mortar or major equipment. So you need to buy or build a building, do some significant renovation to a building, or buy something big like vehicles. If you're going to buy like a whole lab's worth of computers, that might be another option. And then just know that many funders make their grants in specific geographic areas, so it's in a city or a part of one, in a state or in a region. So I don't run into truly national funders very often where they're willing to say, yeah, we give and we consider every area of the United States in the same way. And you can find that out by going on the funder's website and looking if they've got a list of previous grants, or they have an annual report that's posted on their website that shows where they gave and how much they gave. You can kind of figure out if, if you're in Illinois, not in the Chicago area, you could look and see how many grants the funder made, kind of in outstate or greater Illinois. And this is another way to find out some details about funders if you're not able to find much on their website. So use GuideStar. You don't have to pay for this. They're going to keep, so to sign up for the basic level, it's not going to cost you anything. They'll keep trying to sell you stuff. I would say don't. I don't think you need to buy it. So create an account, and then you can search for foundations and then look at their Form 990, which they have to file with the IRS every single year, and that has to include nonprofits and other groups that they made contributions to. So you can see their entire list, see where they give, how much they give, what they tend to support. So I use GuideStar pretty frequently, actually. I think it's a great resource. And then once you've done all this research, you're finally going to make a call to the funder, or you could send them an email. I almost like making phone calls these days because they're sort of disarming because we communicate electronically basically all the time. So you're going to plan for a really brief phone call and have read all the material that you can get your hands on about the funder first. So for sure study their guidelines. You've looked at their website. So you're going to focus your conversation on just a couple of things. You're going to clarify anything you don't understand about the guidelines, and then describe your program idea briefly and get feedback on whether it fits with the funder's guidelines. Find out how much to ask for. So usually I would run some numbers by, so like, what's an appropriate amount to ask for? And people say, well, we give grants anywhere between $2,000 and $20,000. So I talked to a foundation in South Dakota for a client a couple weeks ago, and that's what she said, and that's a good ballpark. She said, a lot of our grants are in the $10,000 range. So given that, I knew that asking for 20 probably wouldn't make them faint, but that we'd be unlikely to get that, and it might be more like 10. Asking for 2 would be too little for that funder, I would say. Sometimes people kind of balk when you ask them, how much money should I ask for? So then say, well, is this a $10,000? Oh no, that's too much. Most of our grants are in the $3,000 to $5,000 range. Or we have some major funders here that I work with on a regular basis, and a couple of them say, you know, if you're not able to ask for, you're not big enough to ask for $25,000 to $35,000 for your project, probably you need to wait to come and see us, and I really appreciate that honesty. And then the end result of all this research is a short list of solid grant proposals. So you've started with a longer list, and through the process of elimination ended up with a short list of the grant possibilities. So now you're going to write your proposal. Hopefully you've got some things already on paper because you started writing your case statement. So first, find your common grant application for your area. So funders in a single state or metro area may use roughly the same form for applicants. Make sure that you know whether or not that's the case. Don't just submit a common grant application. Now I'm seeing more and more funders say, fill out the common grant application, and we have a couple other questions for you to answer as well, and you definitely don't want to leave those out. So you'd want to check on this Giving Forum website, like I said, and then look for your state association of funders. So here's what's in a typical grant application. You'll be asked to describe your organization, its history, mission, and goals. And I've got a picture of a rocket here because you're going to want to describe your organization as being on a trajectory. So how have you grown? Maybe now you're at a critical point of building capacity, starting new programs, building a building, etc. So don't just, in a grant proposal is a persuasive document, don't just assemble a bunch of facts and dump them on the page. Think about your organization and how you can sell it to the funder. That's why I say talk about yourselves as being on a trajectory. You'll also want to include in this section a brief overview of programs, so it's almost like being up above the crowd a little bit and describing all that's out there. So if you've got 3 programs, you're going to write short descriptions for 3 if it's 5. Sometimes I work with groups that have like 10 or more. So you just want to include a couple of sentences to describe each. You want to focus on results, the number of people participating, and recent accomplishments. It's kind of like a little view of everything, like a little bullet-pointed list with short descriptions. You always want to ask for a specific amount of money. I've been working on my telepathic skills with funders since I started doing this more than 25 years ago, and my skills are not improving. So funders cannot read your mind. You need to ask for a specific amount, and you're going to get that amount, arrive at that amount by doing the research that we've talked about. You'll need to have a section in your proposal documenting community needs. So what is it that you're responding to that's happening in the community, that the problem that you're trying to solve, the issue that you're trying to address with your programming. So you might include information here from studies or surveys. Maybe you've done some of your own interviews or focus groups, or you've gotten feedback from volunteers and community residents that you could include in here. And then you'll write your long program description. So I've got here a picture about the 5 senses, because I think when you write about your program, it ought to be like the funder could actually feel like they're there, like they're sitting there. So you want to include enough color, enough detail. So they ought to be able to see the program, the where, the what, who's there, who you're doing this with, and what's the impact. And in a program grant, this is the longest part of the proposal, perhaps making up even more than half of the proposals in terms of the number of pages. Then you'll write a section on collaborative partners. So you'll want to list each of your partners and include a sentence or 2 about how you collaborate with them. Your list could include churches, nonprofits, government agencies, businesses, neighborhood groups, individuals. So this is not a real long section, and if you've got tons of partners, maybe I'd suggest grouping them. So if you've got like 25 church partners, don't describe them individually, just put them in a category called church partners and say we work with 25 churches that provide us with funding and volunteers and expertise and space to operate our program. And we talked about this some last week too, the importance of having a section on evaluation. So this is about the outcomes and how you will measure them. Outcomes being what's going to specifically change in concrete terms in the world because of our work. And measuring tools could include things like surveys, interviews, ability to complete a project, could be a measure, observation by staff or volunteers. So sometimes I work a lot with youth development programs, and sometimes people just carry a little notebook and watch what the kids are doing. So sometimes the outcome has been kids learn to work in a team. So what did they do when they had a dispute? And somebody kind of noted that and was able to report on it later. And then the qualifications of key staff members. So I have a short paragraph for each of your key people. Would probably be your pastor and or executive director and maybe a couple of key program people. And this is a list of typical grant attachments. I'm not going to read through all of them here, but just so you know, you'll probably need 2 budgets, and then again with the corporations you'll need to be able to identify the corporate volunteers. And I'll end just by talking about secular funders a little bit. So some of you are, I'm assuming all of you are faith-based organizations, either churches or parachurch organizations. So you may be talking to foundations and corporations that really don't have a faith focus. So I think when you approach secular funders, you need to find funders that fit with your ministry values and vision. Understand how faith-based your ministry is. Maybe that sounds strange, but you know, how far does the faith go? Is it in your vision and mission? Is it in your program content and design? In your partnerships? And the people in your organization. So you're a group that's requiring people to, you know, employees to subscribe to a particular theology or set of beliefs or not. And I would say don't hide your faith, because funders will often do research on you, and so they'll come, you know, to meetings with you or begin to review your proposal, and will kind of know a lot about where you're at on this. So 4 strategies. Describe your ministry as you see fit, so use whatever language you like to use. Another option for you is to exclude the spiritual aspect from your proposal if there is one. I think that's only fair if this is an optional piece of it, and if you know, a grant funder's money would not be going to support this. I've tended to use options 3 or 4 more myself, so finding some other funding for the spiritual part. So if you were running a transitional housing program for single-parent families and there was like a discipleship or Bible study component to it, you maybe could go find some other churches or some individuals in your own congregation to underwrite that part of it and go seek some grant funding just for the housing pieces of it or case management. And you can say to the funder, you know, we've got some other money for the spiritual parts. We're really just asking you to underwrite this particular part. And another option for you is to leave the spiritual aspect in but describe it a little differently. So I do this a lot with youth development programming. So we might, I don't know, I just think a lot of the things that we teach kids from the Bible, if we've got spiritual content, really come down to how to interact in a respectful way with other people, how to show love to others, how to care about your community. Sometimes we use real churchy language, I found too, so you might say we're going to equip the saints for the work of ministry, and maybe, you know, maybe you could say we're training volunteers and describe it that way. So you might need to change your language a little bit. And then don't be afraid to emphasize the added value of faith-based organizations. So I think we do bring a lot to the table. We've got volunteers and space, might be able to raise money from, we talked about that last week, money from other churches or our church members that could leverage other dollars. You might have denominational resources or church networks. And I think there are foundation and corporate funders that get that faith content of programs is transformative. Also, that houses of worship are more accessible to the community in many cases than other kinds of institutions. So I hear that repeatedly here in my work, that it'd be easier for people to come into the door of a church than to try to go down to the county office, for example. I think one of the greatest things about church is you can build a network of social capital. And so if you're working with people that are disenfranchised in some way, or who are you know, just don't have a lot of networks or connections, church is a place that they can build that. So I'm just thinking about all the things I learned from the people in my church growing up about going to school, pursuing my dreams, getting ready to go to work as an employee. And you know, there are funders that look at church as being an essential way of reaching out in communities of color in particular. So I believe, and I think many funders do, that if you wanted really to do outreach in the African American Latino communities, you wouldn't be able to do that without working with congregations. So I'll end by talking through my do's and don'ts list, and then we will open things up for questions. So here are some things to do as you're getting ready to send out your grant proposals. Do follow the funder's guidelines. Be concise. So funders would rather read something short and to the point and really good than something really long that kind of meanders. Make sure you tell the story so you can respond to questions that funders send you that you know, and fill in the blanks, but it not be very compelling, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So tell the story about the successes that you've seen, about your community, about the transformation that you hope for. Only include the required attachments. You know, don't include extra stuff. Get the grant in by the deadline. If it's not there by the deadline, it's probably going to get tossed. And then remember to try again. You know, if you get no the first time, I would recommend calling the funder and having a conversation about why, and then probably try again the next round. Sometimes it takes like 3 tries to get a grant. And the don'ts would include don't exceed the page limits. And now with online applications, there'll be character limits, so you won't be allowed to exceed those, but make sure you're watching, because you may type away and then part of what you typed is cut off, and if you don't look at that and are aware of it, you'll have a really incomplete looking proposal. Don't miss the deadline. Don't make grammatical or spelling errors. If this is a challenge for you, I'd encourage you to get somebody else involved with you to look at your proposals before you send them in. Don't act like you're entitled to the money. So grant funding is a really competitive process. A lot of funders are only going to fund like maybe 5 to 30% of the proposals that they receive in. So you know, it's competitive. They're not required to give you the money. And then don't forget to say thank you. So if you receive a grant, getting a thank you out the door, whether you decide to send it email or snail mail, I think within 24 hours of getting your notification, you know, maybe you want to allow yourself a week, but to respond quickly and to say thank you is really important. Well, that's the end of my formal proposal, so now I'm open for some questions.
Hello, everyone. So if you have a question for Joy, you can use the controls by raising your hand and letting me know that you would like to speak with her.
Wondering if anybody's doing special events. I'd like to hear what it is that you're doing.
We do not at this point have anyone with their hand raised, Joy. So I do want to thank each of you for joining us for Joy's presentation, and I encourage you to learn more about her latest book, 7 Creative Models for Community Ministry, and you can find that on the website at www.judsonpress.com, and if you place an online order, you will receive 20% off of the retail price. As I stated at the beginning of the webinar, I will be filing following up with you via email, sending you a copy of this presentation along with Joy's notes, and I will also provide you with a link to part 1 of Funding Your Community Ministry, which was presented last week by Joy. Joy in the presentation lists her email address and contact information if you would like a one-on-one consultation with her and if your church is interested in further partnering with her. And so with that, I say thank you, Joy, again, and everyone please enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.